was special, 200 was special, but for 300, we're building the greatest card ever assembled. I mean, the first fight of the night is Cody Garbrandt versus Figueiredo is the first fight of the night. So every one of the fights on this card could be a main event on a fight night or a pay-per-view. What's going to make 300 more special, but what you can expect is the first prelim of the night for you to be going like, holy, this is the first prelim of the night? This is insane. This isn't even right. These two shouldn't be on the first prelim of the night. That's how good 300 is going to be. Everything about UFC 300 could completely change tomorrow. Every fight that's on the card already could be a main event on either a fight night or a pay-per-view. We have one more slot to fill mid-level, and then we have the main event. I know what I'm trying to do. It could end up being two completely different things unless I completely fucking change everything. There are so many twists and turns and crazy shit going on behind the scenes of UFC 300. Everything that everybody thinks about UFC 300 right now literally could all change. Everything about UFC 300 could completely change tomorrow. Every fight that's on the card already could be a main event on either a fight night or a pay-per-view. So we have one more slot to fill, and then we have the main event. There could actually be a documentary right now being shot of behind the scenes to build UFC 300. It's fucking crazy. We have a couple options for the main event. I'm still playing with it. Listen, we were out there talking to lots of people, trying to make lots of fights, and in this business, it's about taking opportunities. Headlining UFC 300 with all the buzz and all the energy around it. In this business, you have injuries and all kinds of other bullshit that goes on behind the scenes. And you know, we've been talking about 300 forever, and we were just trying to make the best fights that we could possibly make. We had 2 more fights to make, and we were trying to put on 2 badass fights. So these 2 guys are it.
This event should feel like it is larger than any other MMA event to date. It should feel like such an incredible celebration, with hype rising through the stratosphere, celebrities and internet personalities queued up for homie hookup tickets, fireworks planned for the outside of T-Mobile Arena timed for an incredible drone shot with an angle showing the spear for some wicked foreshadowing. Dana in tears like he was back in March and April of 2020 due to not being able to secure a venue for a fight card. This event should feel like the Super Bowl in 1993 or something. I didn't see it, but I'm sure it was huge. It should feel like the weight of the event is 5 times the gravity of Earth itself. So why does it feel like it's only halfway to that level for the majority? What happened? The fights are good enough. In my opinion, great. I'd say most are outstanding, but I don't speak for the entire world. We have people crying over the main event. We have grown men crying that women are fighting on the card. But we also have had a shift from people trying to claim that UFC 299 was a better card than that of UFC 300. But why? Why all this insanity? Is there anyone specific to blame? Is it the fault of the fan base? Are the fights really at all disappointing? Have we suffered consensus brain rot? I am certain that the UFC will give proper promotional treatment for the event in the week to come. At least some cool countdown variant. But being one that once believed UFC 300 was going to be a much more enormous event, the biggest the company has ever put on, at least potentially, I have questions, gripes, and praises.
But what I'm sharing is
Chael Sonnen has one of the largest online platforms out of anyone MMA related. Most 4 to 5 times over, minimum. Back in the day, Chael talked a game that was not only ballsy, but based and entertaining. He was indeed polarizing, pushing dialogue right up to the fence line without really ever crossing it. But Chael was a hell of a competitor, and he did his share of ass beating. His well-articulated tirades at Anderson Silva and other opponents set him up for a career post-UFC, which not only included the UFC, but included Bellator and ESPN. I mean, the dude just re-signed with ESPN to debate with the biggest tool in the box, that is, Daniel Cormier. Anyway, Chael has a YouTube channel with nearly 1.3 million subscribers at the time of this recording, so even if he posts a nothing video, thousands upon thousands see it. Sifting through comments in various videos, it seems that some people watch Chael just so they can complain about him. Many seem to watch him because they think he gives bad takes in a humorous way. Others see him as the savior of MMA YouTube. Whatever your vibe is with the guy, I think most could agree that 70 plus fucking videos discussing UFC 300 or any topic is way too much. In my opinion, he took away any fun from the idea of trying to post lead up and hype videos for the event. He said he had fun with it multiple times in more recent videos, and I'm sure he did. Chael seemingly took every single inspired thought he had about the event and made them into videos, but because of his thorough efforts to cover every aspect, possibility, and impossibility in his opinions about 300, other videos put out there just didn't come across as valuable or interesting. Throughout all of the insanity that came from Sonnen regarding 300, he had many things I personally agreed with, and had some enlightening takes. For example, idiots trying to tie 30 years of UFC to UFC 300 as if they equaled the same thing, even though the UFC will mention the 30 years leading up to 300. I guarantee it. Or pointing out that the storylines for determining the headliner were simply not there yet. But Chael also said things like Jorge and Justin Gaethje was an eyeball lure for UFC 300 over something like a Ronda return. He interpreted excitement and hype for 300 and balled it up with absurd takes to present reasoning of business practices. Chael said things that just didn't make sense as well. To be fair, I think we all did. His Habib rumor startup, his ridiculous video that concluded with a troll about Musk and Zuck headlining 300, or how about Fedor and Aspinall? I didn't find any of that funny. It honestly felt like Chael was eventually a little bit over discussing 300. I don't blame him. I also distinctly remember him at first saying that he didn't understand what the hype was about and that 300 was just another number. But that's not all. Chael started breaking down the fights announced and talking about odds, pretty much destroying other people trying to do the same. I'm not mad at him. This isn't my thing at all. But to have so much speculation and information from one person, not one channel or company, just one person, would kinda kill the excitement for anything, in my opinion. That's not to say Chael ruined it all by himself or at all, but his efforts are one thing to consider as he has a huge influence. The reality is, Chael is a talking head that will occasionally spam a topic, and he probably did get some people excited just like he got some people bored. Some media heads and creators took a more level-headed approach, others seem to just perform. It's quite exhausting and obvious, but screaming and pouting and punching the wall and doing shock face and all this quacky shit does get clicks, and the people that click on that lame shit are easily influenced. This becomes a slippery slope in comments and on X, or if you're making a stand, Twitter. I don't think it helps at all with such exaggerated disappointment or oversaturated negativity. When you look at it this way, people like Chael become favorable in the situation.
I don't give a fuck.
Fair enough.
Don't give a fuck.
Dana White, in my opinion, wasn't as hyped about 300 as the media and casual fan base grew to be at first, if at all. I really don't believe the majority hardcore fan base was as hyped about the event as the internet fan base. And I wonder when Dana realized there was a ton of anticipation and excitement surrounding April 13th. Dana, I believe, was initially of the mindset of UFC 300 300 being another card to get done, not so much a milestone event. It backs up my opinion that you really can't blame one person for the lack of hype. I feel it was a few things. For one, people naturally gravitate toward round numbers. Brian Campbell of Morning Combat brought this up several times. UFC 300 is a good round number. Also, some crazies tied 30 years of UFC to UFC 300, as I mentioned earlier. I think another thing that was fairly obvious to anybody paying attention was the merger of the WWE and the UFC. Now, we know Dana and others believe there is close to zero crossover potential between UFC fans and WWE fans, but the TKO board and owners of Endeavor see it differently. And yes, I know there are new owners of Endeavor at this point. If anything, just the timing of the merger with Wrestlemania 40 and UFC 300 in the same month, you'd think some extraordinary planning was happening. In my opinion, Endeavor would like to create as much fan crossover as possible over the next 5 to 10 years, building a company to maximize the selling price, likely overseas. To show some form of evidence to support that theory, you can look at the hype promo for UFC whatever it was with Seth Rollins and Cody Rhodes talking about being a good heel, Michael Venom Page and Izzy walking out to The Undertaker's theme, Colby Covington walking out to Kurt Angle's theme, camera shots of Rhea Ripley at UFC 299 with Buddy, Michael Chandler grabbing a hot microphone to call out Conor McGregor on Monday Night Raw, Daniel Cormier being at every WWE event he can wiggle into, even being a referee, wrestling references on live UFC commentary, the MMA hour turning into the WWE hour. No? How about the fact that Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson essentially replaced Vince McMahon at the top of this newly merged company, being on Joe Rogan's podcast telling lies about pride, allegedly in my opinion, and having fighters wear his shoes to walk out for every UFC fight? No? How about Logan Paul's Prime logo on both canvases for WWE and UFC, while being a WWE wrestler? If you look at all of this, you may start to understand a little better why Dana White has so much interest in Power Slap and how he used Nina Drama, allegedly in my opinion, and a god-awful oil him up meme that grown men participated in droves to boost the Las Vegas event. You may start to understand why he said his biggest passion right now, and what he is into most, is the Contender Series. You may be led to think that Dana sees the writing on the wall, and little by little the UFC is becoming more and more diluted. I feel like since January 20th at least, Dana has been exhausted of the hype of this event. Not because he doesn't like the UFC anymore, but because it wasn't in his focus in enough time to plan a good rollout. UFC 300 is not as important to Dana White as UFC 100 or even 200 was, allegedly in my opinion. On one level, it does make sense, but on another level, I believe there was a huge opportunity to make this a gigantic event. I mean, bigger than what it already will be. For me, UFC 300 is still a spectacular event. But there is no denying there was a lot of disappointment floating around. Obviously, Dana at some point, like I mentioned, realized how big people were perceiving this, and he tried to get excited alongside everyone. But for him, this card just wasn't of the same gravity. I'm not saying he didn't care, but I am saying the man has been doing this a long time and is now very rich with a lot of different projects going on. Not even International Fight Week comes across as important to him right now. He's already talking about UFC Noche and saying the same things he was saying about UFC 300. I hope he doesn't set expectations too high with it. Hopefully, he can look at the promotion, hesitation, and waiting around with UFC 300 and not make the same mistakes going into September. I think we've had enough empty promises and disappointment for 1 year.
Fuck your story.
Going back to Brian Campbell and saying that 300 is a nice round number, I believe the fact that WWE hosting its 40th Wrestlemania was another reason to make this event a spectacle. With these two events landing on consecutive weekends, one would think the plan would be to put the first half of April over the moon, especially since TKO has already began putting both WWE and UFC in the same cities over the same weekend. See Anaheim. I think the timing of everything surrounding the WWE, the UFC, and TKO kind of hindered how far they could have pushed things, and the powers that be chose to remain level-headed throughout. This isn't the worst plan. Given what happened with Vince McMahon yet again at the top of the year, could have completely destroyed TKO before it even got going. Now, like several other content heads, I have followed the Vince McMahon legal story. For me, it's been since 2019. I am one amongst a healthy amount of people that have read all these court documents and statements. I have sat and reviewed SEC filings and shareholder meetings along with countless others, and I believe that his issues were a factor in determining how to go about the second half of 2023 and first quarter of 2024. For time's sake, I'm not going into details. I have a couple of videos that go over some of the issues, and I'll link them and other videos below if you're interested in further information. That all said, Wrestlemania 40 is being led by The Rock's return. This wasn't always the plan. You see, Rocky, not the homegirl Raquel Pennington, but Dwayne Johnson, for a while was the biggest Hollywood action star the world had ever seen. I'm not sure if he still is, or if one even exists, but something went wrong in Hollywood for Dwayne. I'm going to try to make this short and sweet, because what happened with The Rock could be a 45 to 60 minute video on its own. Basically, Rock wanted Black Adam and Superman to be the Carl Weathers and Arnold Schwarzenegger of the modern era. Abysmal superhero and poorly edited, poorly animated, poorly written, poorly directed, and poorly acted film fatigue was well underway by the time Black Adam was released. Meanwhile, another form of psychosis was going on at Netflix where Henry Cavill, the Superman Rock wanted this new DC story arc to include, was despised by the showrunners of The Witcher. Henry Cavill ended up being a pariah of Hollywood for a minute for wanting to stick to the lore of The Witcher. The people against him claimed he was difficult to work with, or whatever. Some psycho even made up a report about him. But still, The Rock got a little of what he wanted, and Cavill made an appearance in an end credit. Spoiler alert. James Gunn was appointed to reset the DC universe. Gunn doesn't want Henry Cavill in it. Allegedly, in my opinion. Gunn doesn't want Black Adam or The Rock in it. Allegedly, in my opinion. Rock didn't take too kindly to this. Saw the landscape of the land late 2022, early 2023, and pivoted to the WWE, but not before merging the XFL with the USFL to create the UFL and taking a board spot vacated by Vince McMahon, factually. The Great One was not at all needed to drive hype going into WrestleMania 40. Triple H already had his hands full with more than enough storylines and story arcs timed just right heading into the event going as far back as November of 2023 and beyond. WWE had things at a fever pitch with talent like Gunther, the man that is doing all he can to bring back the prestige of the Intercontinental Championship. Rhea Ripley, the hottest thing on the WWE women's roster unless you ask Becky Lynch and the rest of Judgment Day. Io Sky, the women's champion that makes hearts melt while tearing the roof off any venue she performs in, and the rest of Damage Control. Ex-member of Damage Control, Bayley. This is just the tip of the iceberg going into this massive event, but the ocean the iceberg is sitting in is the NOI, Dwayne Johnson and Roman Reigns' legendary family, or the Bloodline. For 2 years now, Cody Rhodes was pegged to take the biggest title in the business off of Roman. For those that do not keep up, I'll make it quick. Cody returned to WWE from AEW. It was quickly realized that Cody was the guy to stop the unstoppable Roman. Well, Cody tore his pec in 2022, but unlike John Jones, still showed up to work, not only to train or for promos, or spearing football players or leg-kicking fans, but to wrestle a main event match. But the pectoral tear still put plans for him on hold. He still won the Royal Rumble in 2023 and went on to Wrestlmania 39 to take on Roman Reigns. Well, Cody didn't win that match. He went on to face Brock 3 or 4 matches without any reason given to the audience until right before their final match in a throwaway promo, and nobody was sure where he would go from there. Cody goes on to win 2024 Royal Rumble, which traditionally sets the winner up to choose who they face at the next Mania. Everyone knew it was Roman that he would take on. But hold on. 2 things happened that caused a major shakeup. First, CM Punk, who also returned to the WWE in time for the 2024 Royal Rumble, tore his tricep in the event, which put his plans on hold. You see, Punk was set to take on Seth at WrestleMania 40, but his injury iced him for months. Second, Vince McMahon got hit yet with another lawsuit for acting like a maniac. Allegedly, in my opinion, this lawsuit was too much for even Ari Emanuel to ignore, and Vince was booted/resigned. This left a huge black eye on WrestleMania plans, or at least could have, but enter The Rock, the guy whose logo is on the feet of every single UFC fighter that walks out to have a scrap in the octagon or even weigh in. Rocky Maivia comes back not only into WWE, but as I stated earlier, into a TKO board position with company ownership. This, in my opinion, was the first pivot that WWE and TKO made to save face from the Vince noise. This pivot included a Netflix deal for WWE worth $5 billion. This pivot included The Rock coming back to perform against his cousin Roman Reigns at WrestleMania 40. Well, to some, the match was coming about 3 years too late, but fuck that. The NOI family does what they want. Rock basically little broed Cody Rhodes in front of thousands live and millions on air, usurping his right to challenge Reigns for what he thought was the biggest thing they could do to save WrestleMania from the Vince McMahon controversy. Allegedly, in my opinion. Kinda worked, except fans cried, and cried hard for Cody Rhodes to get his shot. The next pivot was from this incident. Fan backlash was palpable, and The Rock joined the bloodline instead of going up against it. The WrestleMania that was already expected to be lit AF went nuclear. I bring all this up for 2 reasons when talking about UFC 300. 1, TKO keeps finding ways to win. Vince McMahon being involved in crazy things seemed to do nothing but help the company. With him getting kicked out, it opened a door for The Rock to come on in while Hollywood was beginning to shut doors on opportunity for him. Now, I think The Rock would eventually have continued to do just fine either way, but the timing was kismet. Not only has WrestleMania 40 hype been higher than any WrestleMania hype in at least 20 years, WWE secured the bag with Netflix and has poured a lot of cold water on the hot topic that was Vince McMahon. 2, the swing of the fans. The fans completely changed what The Rock and TKO initially had planned for Mania. If you think it was all a brilliant work from the get, I'm sorry, but you are incorrect. The Rock is in show business. That is his entire public being. That is his entire family's public being. Loving him or hating him is not the determining factor. Are you paying attention? Then he wins. Even though they are the other half of TKO Group, the UFC does not have the ability to pivot in this fashion. Conor McGregor never got a bigger piece of the pie like The Rock has of TKO, and contracts with ESPN and fighters doesn't allow for such a drastic sidestep. Injuries happen in the WWE just like they do in the UFC. As I said, CM Punk being injured during the Rumble was a huge problem, but Drew McIntyre was right there to pick up the pieces and go at Seth Rollins. This is not something the UFC can so easily do. When Dana White promises something grand and spectacular, Chandler, it's all contingent on fighters agreeing to fight and they stay injury-free during training and they come in on weight. For example, if Conor Chandler was the headliner for UFC 300 and Conor was injured in camp, there is no fighter on the roster that would be able to replace him as the main event against Chandler and have equal draw. This on top of contract stipulations with both the broadcaster and athlete, and being on weight, just make it impossible to guarantee, especially with someone like McGregor. So when there is a fan and media backlash, the UFC just says tough shit and ignores it, keeps gaslighting positivity and pushes out anyone questioning it. You're gonna watch it anyway, right? But close your eyes and go back to July of 2023. Imagine if from that month there was no USADA fallout, no John Jones injury, no Conor Chandler delay, no Juliana Pena re-injury, and no difficulty or surprise with the other names that were rumored and floating about for the 300 card. I believe the card would look so much different and would have been promoted in such a different way. I do think TKO Group could have and would have done a bigger tie-in for these two events, especially with them being back-to-back weekends. I just can't help but feel like it. But it wasn't all the WWE side of things that I feel caused some hesitation on building something historic with both companies as one in its first year with such nice round numbers of their biggest events. The UFC had an antitrust lawsuit trial set for the week after UFC 300. What a 3 weeks this all would have been, right? This could change the entire landscape of combat sports. It could affect TKO and WWE. Fighters could start being
And it's gone.
Oh, well, that's the fight game, I guess.
Kobe ain't gon' do nothing. Ain't gon' do nothing.
Turn up the BS, stupido. Turn up the vibe, go dumb. La música está loco. These girls just wanna have fun.
Fuck the whole rap game up, bruh. Trolling this shit, bruh.
That's a bad habit I learned out in Cabot. I'll go get a pound and put it in the attic. If I need some money, then I'ma go grab it. Fighting is good, but that shit is sporadic.
My nigga.
I actually got a 3D scanner for my girlfriend, so, you know, polar opposites.
Everything is right when we go out every night, losing our minds, but it's alright. Chasing after boys, and then we fight, drinking till we die, yeah we might.
As for me, I do think the idea of 300 started spiraling out of control when John Anik mentioned Ronda Rousey. He said if anyone deserved an opportunity to come back, it would be Ronda. This happened around the time she was in story with Shayna Baszler and wrapping said story up at SummerSlam, which was set to be Ronda's final match with WWE. I have thoroughly covered this topic and timeline before, all videos linked below. But now that more has come out and Ronda did a media tour for her book release, it's more believable that Ronda wasn't planning a UFC return, though I'm not still fully convinced. I for one do not think it would have been crazy for Ronda to come back for 300. If Amanda Nunes wasn't returning to take on Juliana Pena for a vacant belt, then Ronda would be the one. It wasn't Raquel Pennington because I asked her that exact question. The idea of her and Juliana or anyone never came up for the card. Her words.
Back into this whole Juliana, and I know you already know that's my main focus with you. Juliana spoke with Ariel the Monday after your victory, after you fought Myra, okay? Forget everything else, but she said she was back to 100% training. And in my mind, I'm sitting there... Why were you and Myra even made if she was already training that soon? we could have waited as fans, maybe not you guys, but as fans, we could have waited another 90 days and put a historic fight on a historic card in April. Was this ever an idea pitched to you? Was this ever something that the UFC approached you with?
No, I got a phone call stating that Juliana's still injured. They need the division to keep rolling, so they're gonna make the fight between me and Myra, and honestly, it threw me for a loop.
As a whole, the UFC roster didn't seem too excited about 300 once late December, early January came around. It seemed like they weren't giving anything for the media to feed off of. Like many, I was a bit surprised by the lack of enthusiasm. The majority of fighters that were most excited for potentially fighting on the card didn't even make it to the early prelims. Some allegedly didn't even get a phone call with an offer. So many myths, rumors, speculation, and half-truths. So many intentional misleading hints of overhyped nothing burger controversies. Media and content creators would take the smallest, and I do mean smallest, of quotes and or video footage and transform it into some UFC 300 piece. Fans and casual scrollers would run with damn near each and every angle that was thrown out there. Even ones like with George St. Pierre. He was directly asked about it. He said there is no chance he even comes back at all whatsoever, let alone 300. And some people, for one reason or another, wouldn't believe it and trust in the incorrect information instead. I had Alexa Grasso pegged for the 300 card before any fights were announced. I was fairly certain she'd show up somewhere on there against someone, and for me, only Erin Blanchfield fit the bill. Anyway, I figured Alexa wasn't going to be on 300 once her and Wiley were trying to book a fight for themselves against each other on Instagram. From what I can tell, Alexa and Valentina is only penciled in for Noche. As of this writing, there has not been a commitment from Alexa, Valentina, or Dana, but it feels like that's where it's going. It's safe to assume the plan is to let tough play out and hope the fight holds together no matter how much Shevchenko stands against it for September in the Sphere. Israel Adesanya, in my opinion, was no doubt a shoe-in and likely the crown jewel of UFC 300 until everything went wayward in the second half of 2023. No one will ever convince me that Izzy had it all under control during this time. I feel he had a lot going on various levels, more than usual. During his hiatus, the man that took his strap, Sean Strickland, got seemingly rush booked against Diamond Dallas Duplessis in January of 2024. Dricus Dallas Page defeated Deshaun after 25 minutes of bloody violence. Being bruised, pulped up, and frat boy drinking at rugby games, Dricus declined a late offer to face Adesanya for the allegedly historic event. Dricus' reasoning isn't the worst. The fight with Deshaun left a lot of damage, and once again the UFC was trying to rush book DDP. Why? Why does Dricus keep getting rush offers anyway? Dricus also said 300 is just a number, and Africa is the location he desires for his showdown with Stylebender. In my opinion, it was the right call. Not only does the match have a bit of lore behind it that involves Africa, it's also a great counter to any hopes the PFL has to be the first to open anything on the continent involving Francis Ngannou. Speaking of which, and this is just me thinking aloud, can you imagine if Francis and the UFC worked something out and he was an eligible choice for UFC 300 against Jones or Aspinall? Wild. We actually ended up with no heavyweights for the event. Looking at it now, I really don't like how it's all gone down. John Jones was supposed to beat the shit out of Stipe Miocic in December of 2023, allegedly, in my opinion, but tore his pectoral during training for the fight. Tom Aspinall clinched the interim title once this happened and has been forced to wait around for the fight people are most lukewarm to. John Jones versus Stipe Miocic. Dana has said Tom can defend the belt if he wants to, but we all know what the fight should be. With Bones injured, the entire heavyweight division is sidelined for 300. It seems that the heavyweights are being positioned around 300, and I'd venture to say it has to do with the UFC going to Manchester, Jones, and Miocic. A random thought, John Jones was a focus for UFC 100, 200, and 300. How his career is so great while having so much more room and opportunity throughout it to be even greater is just a baffling idea to ponder. But I've been thinking, Dana did say if Tom wants to defend the interim belt, we will do it. Which, if Aspinall wins one or two more, let's say Cyril Gaines and Curtis Blades, and the winner of John and Stipe stick around to face Aspinall, well then this all works out to the UFC's benefit. You would imagine if things went this way, injury and suspension free, Aspinall and the Jones Miocic winner would fight at the end of this year or first quarter 2025. That is a fight with an epic story behind it, and it would either position Aspinall to be the greatest heavyweight of all time or declare John Jones / Stipe Miocic the undisputed baddest dude ever walking earth, according to the UFC. But imagine the opposite scenario. Either Aspinall loses in an interim bout, and that's that, or he wins a couple more, just like I said, and both Jones and Stipe retire. Well, then you have no rivalry, no story, or even suitable dance partner for Aspinall, which in my view would detract from the run that he could be on otherwise. Also, would be very damaging to the heavyweight division. Leon Edwards was consistently a big focal point for UFC 300. I'm guessing it's because of how much Blahal was online talking about his title shot, and how Leon let it be known he wanted to fight on the card. Why he isn't on the card, it doesn't seem to be his fault. Apparently, Leon was welcoming all comers Dana could conjure for him. Leon allegedly said yes to 3 potential opponents that all declined due to the holiday known as Ramadan. When I heard this, I immediately guessed one was Blahal, but then I remembered him saying he would fight during the holiday, or shortly after it, which April 13th falls within that time frame. It turned out that Remember the Name was never even fucking offered the fight. I mean, what are we doing here? Blahal went on to basically say that Dana is just making Leon look good, that the 3 offers wasn't true. But Hamzat and Islam Makhachev came out saying they were offered Leon. It is strange if you think about it. Just 8 months ago, Leon was saying no to both Kobe and Bilal. So why the shift in energy for 300? Was the nice round number that important to him? Even with UFC Manchester right around the corner? Maybe the UFC offered Leon to people they knew wouldn't take it, that Leon knew wouldn't take it. But it would make him look good. Shit. Maybe Blahal is right. Conor McGregor is still the biggest draw the UFC has or has ever had, but since 2016, he has had 2 wins and 4 losses, counting Mayweather. If you don't count it, then it means he's only fought 5 times, rendering only 2 wins. Either way you cut it, in my opinion, it remains impressive that he still has such a large audience anticipating an MMA return. McGreg's had more than enough time to have his leg heal, beef up with the broccoli and chicken alongside Jake Gyllenhaal, allegedly in my opinion, and scale back down in time to fight for UFC 300. I keep hearing drug testing arguments, but if I'm not mistaken, isn't it the UFC's final discretion for a positive test punishment? Correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember reading that the Drug-Free Sport International, or DFSI, is only collecting the samples. The samples are sent to SMARTL, or Sports Medicine Research and Testing Laboratory, then the UFC. I believe the one spearheading the program is George Piro, a pretty well-vetted dude, and they decide on the punishment. This is what I was thinking earlier about Chael declaring Ronda, Brock, and GSP being silly. Yes, It is silly, but he was pointing to the testing polls for the reasoning, which from what I can tell wouldn't matter at all if the UFC decided to exempt a fighter. It may have looked bad from the public's perspective, but that's all. Since when did the UFC give a shit about that? Anyway, I go back to all involved being hesitant due to the antitrust lawsuit, which is now gone. Had the UFC known how it would have played out, I believe we would have seen Conor on this card. There are a ton of possibilities out there to ponder when trying to understand why Conor hasn't been booked for a fight yet. Drug testing may have been the issue last year, but I believe there is enough out there to suggest that it's more than drug testing this year. I think he brought up a strong point when he said to Ariel, what does a new contract with the UFC even look like for someone like him? What could that even be? With 2 fights, according to him, left on his contract, we could be looking at another Francis Ngannou situation in terms of stretching out a deal. But for McGregor, even more money outside of the UFC is guaranteed without having to lace another glove. Conor saw this coming back when he was calling for a piece of the company itself. He was trying to do something in the same ilk of what The Rock has now done with TKO. However, this was not meant to be, and one could understand why a re-signing may have not yet happened. Conor also said he was in for 300 when replying to a fan on X back in December. At the end of December 2023, Conor declared he and Chandler were fighting in June, only to have Dana White shut it down. Conor does this regularly, so it makes it difficult to trust anything he says at this point. This also happened at UFC 200, only to have Dana shut it down. I am fairly confident in saying that too much has been made public since the Mystic Mac days regarding the business relationship between the UFC and their fighters for Conor to pull the wool over anyone's eyes. It's basically one-sided, and not even he is an exception unless the UFC grants it. At one point, McGregor may have had a bit more leverage, but the UFC does not need Conor, though I am certain they want him, just on their terms.
I challenge you to an I quit match where one of us has to say, I quit.
Even without these fighters and several more I haven't mentioned in this video due to the interest of time, UFC 300 is without a doubt one of the most loaded and exciting cards that could be assembled. A lot of storylines are important. Some may be going. Some may be arriving. Some may be continuing to dominate, and some may be set to shock the world. Every single fucking fight that got booked had something noteworthy to it. While I still believe this card could have been better planned and promoted and talked about in a more thorough and rational way, none of this ended up being filler or without consequence. The UFC had to literally take it day by day, going as far back as August to make any kind of plans for the event. Unlike the WWE, they do not and cannot pull anyone up to fill in so readily. Fighter injuries and simple reluctance to take a fight on April 13th, 2024. Power Slap and the Contender Series had to have pulled away from the focus on the card. UFC 299 seemed for some reason more of a hyped event than 300. Those that said 299 was a better card than 300 were just wrong in my view. TKO Group had a Vince McMahon issue which caused a reshaping of the company while a pending lawsuit was being handled against the UFC. All these factors and more are what I believe caused a bit of a gaffe for the event. But again, the event came together pretty well. So take my money.
Hey, I'm not surprised, motherfucker.